Phoenix, Liaozhai is a native of Pingle County. At the age of 15, I started studying at home. His parents died early, and he wandered around, indulged, and abandoned his studies. He has less than half a family, but his natural tastes are grooming. Even the mattress furniture at home is exquisite. One night, Liaozhai was invited to drink, forgot to put out the candle and laughed. It was only after a few rounds of drinking that he remembered the incident and hurried home. He leaned over and peeked inside, only to see a teenager lying in bed hugging a pretty girl. The red water pond was on the back of a derelict mansion of wealthy people, where things were so bizarre that he knew the pair were foxes and not afraid, barging in and saying, "How can I sleep in my bed?" Panicked, they picked up their clothes and fled naked, only to lose a purple silk trouser with a stitched purse strapped to their trousers. Liaozhai is delighted, but I'm afraid they stole it back and clung to it in the quilt. A little while later, a fluffy-haired woman came in through the door and asked Liaozhai for something to lose. Liaozhai smiled and demanded money, but she promised to give him wine, but Liaozhai refused. And she gave him gold, neither did she. The girl smiled and laughed. And then he goes back and says, "My aunt says, if you give something back, you'll get a beautiful wife in return." "Who is your aunt?" Mr. Liu asked. "My family name is Pai, my aunt is Baxian, and she sleeps with Hulang," she replied. Ergu Shuixian was married to a native of Dingguan of Fuchuan County. The three aunts are more beautiful than the two girls and never see her unsatisfied. Liaozhai, I'm afraid she didn't keep her word and asked to sit here and wait for news. She went there for a while and said, and told me to tell him. How can good things be done right away? I just told my aunt about it and she scolded me. Just wait a few days, and our family is not the one who made promises and didn't keep them. Liaozhai gave it back to her. After a few days, there was no news. One evening, Liaozhai came home from the outside, closed the door and just sat down. Suddenly, the two doors opened automatically. Two people came in with four corners of a quilt in their hands and a woman in their pocket. They said, "Here comes the bride. Put it on the bed and go." Liaozhai looks closer. The girl sleeps deeply, still exudes fragrant booze. Her red face is drunken, and her petite appearance can pour over everyone in the world. Liaozhai was overjoyed, lifting her feet to take off her socks and gently taking off her clothes while holding her body. The girl was a little sober, looking at Liaozhai with her eyes wide open, but her limbs were still unable to move freely. "The 8 immortals betrayed me," she said. Liaozhai hugged her and made out. The woman smiled and said, "See you this evening, cold man." Liaozhai said, "It's a bit of a charm. What a cool person. And they love each other." After a while, Fengshen said, "The 8 immortals are not shy. They have sullied people's mattresses, but they use me to change her pants. I'll get back at her for sure." Since then, the phoenix hasn't come in one night, and the two of them are very loving and very loving. One day, Fengshen took a piece of kushiro from his sleeve and said, "This is 8 immortals." A few more days later, Fengshen arrived with an embroidered pair of shoes in her arms. The stitched shoes were beaded and embroidered with gold thread. They were beautifully made, and Fengshen instructed Liaozhai to take them out to promote them. Liaozhai bragged among his new friends with his embroidery shoes, asking everyone to see them to use money and wine as gifts. Since then, Liaozhai has kept his embroidery shoes as a rare commodity. One night, Fengshen came and said something about her goodbye. Liaozhai was very strange. He asked her, and Fengshen replied, "My sister resented me because of the stitched shoes, and wanted to take the whole family away from this place, so as to isolate me from you." Liaozhai was afraid and would rather give her back her shoes. "She blackmailed me this way, and if she gave it back to her, she got her way," Fengshen said. Liaozhai asked, "Why don't you stay alone?" "When my parents left, my family of more than 10 entrusted Hulang to take care of me if I didn't follow them. I'm afraid Baxian, a long-tongued woman, would spread rumors and create trouble for me," Feng said. The phoenix has stopped coming. 2 years later, Liaozhai misses Fengshen. One day, on the road, he met a girl walking slowly on a horse. An old servant pulling the reins and pulling the horse and rubbing shoulders with him. The girl looked back. lifted her veil and peeked at him. Later, a teenager came up from behind and asked him, "Who is this woman? She seems pretty." Liu Chishui's praise goes on and on. The teenager saluted him, smiling and saying, "Too much. That's my wife." Liu Chishui apologized to him with trepidation. "It doesn't matter, but of the 3 Zhuge brothers in Nanyang, you got one of them, the Wulong, and what's to give the other 2 little people credit?" Liu Chishui was astonished by what he said, with the teenager telling him, "Don't you know anyone who slept in your bed secretly?" Liu Chishui knows he's Hulang, so they talk and laugh. Hulang said, "Our parents-in-law have just come back. We're going to see each other. Would you like to come along?" Liu Chishui was so happy that he followed them into Hongzhen. Hulang disembarked from a mansion in the mountains where locals had fled the war. Later, several people came out and said, Liu Guanren also came. The 2 men entered the door and met with their parents-in-law. Another was already there. His boots were gorgeous and shiny. Father-in-law said, "This is Ding's son-in-law from Fuchuan County." They're sitting on their own as they greet each other. After a while, the tea was served and everyone was chatting and laughing. Father-in-law said, "Today the 3 son-in-law came together, but it's a rare gathering. There are no outsiders. Let's get the girls out. Let's get everyone together." Soon the sisters were out. The old man told him to put his seat on and sit down with his son-in-law. 8 immortals see Liu Chishui, only to hide the smile. The immortals joke with her. Daffodils look slightly different, but steady and gentle. The full audience are all chatting and laughing, but she just smiles with wine. So the booths are crossed. The Blumisk is incendiary, and everyone drinks very cheerfully. Seeing various instruments on his bed, Liu Chishui picked up a jade flute and asked for permission to play a tune to mark his father-in-law's birthday. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Wang has called the people who are good at musical instruments to do one thing each." So the crowd scrambled to get the instruments. Only Mr. Ding and Phoenix wouldn't. Ding Lang is not familiar with the music. Can't take it. "Are you the one who can't bend his fingers? Say it and throw the plate in the arms of the immortal." And there was a lot of music. The elder Wang said with delight, "It's wonderful to have fun. You sisters can sing and dance. Why don't you each try to perform what you're good at?" 8 immortals stood up and held the daffodils and said, "The immortals have always regarded her singing throat as more precious than gold. They would not dare to drive her. The 2 of us could sing a song together." Their song and dance had just ended, and a maid arrived with a gold plate carrying fruit that no one knew was called. "This is a fruit from Chennai, called Timbalo," Mr. Wang said. "I caught some of them and sent them to son-in-law." "Do you love and loathe your son-in-law differently because they're rich and poor?" Fengzhen said, ruefully. "I'm a little out of character. Happy, but not saying anything." Bazian said, "That is a guess because Ding Lang is from another county. If you're a child, does it mean that only Phoenix has a sour son-in-law with a big fist?" Fengzhen was never happy, stripped off her fancy clothes, handed the drum to her maid, and sang a song of broken kilns, 2 tears. When they finished, they dumped their sleeves and laughed. To the displeasure of the entire audience, Baxian said, "This girl has the same capriciousness as before. I'm going after the Phoenix. I don't know where." Liu Chishui, embarrassed, resigned and returned. On the way, I saw Fengzhen sitting at the side of the road, and Fengzhen greeted him at his side and said, "You're also a man and a husband. Can't you take a breath for your wife? Fame and fortune are in the book, and I hope you work hard for yourself." Hurried out the door. "The thorns pierce my shoes," he said, raising his feet. "What was given to you? Did you bring it with you?" Liu Chishui took out the embroidered shoes and Fengzhen brought them to replace them. Liu Chishui asked for his old shoes, and Fengzhen smiled and said, "Lang Zhen is also a scoundrel. Where have you seen your wife's things hidden in your arms? If you love me, I have something to give you. Immediately take out a mirror and give it to him and say, 'If you want to see me, you should look in the book. Otherwise, there will be no time to see me again. When we're done talking, we're gone.'" Liu Chishui returned home wistfully. "Take a look," and see Young Hyun standing in the mirror with her back, as if looking at someone 100 steps away. So I thought of Fengzhen's instruction, and I refused the guests and studied behind closed doors. One day, Liu Zhishui saw the phoenix in the mirror suddenly appear in front, and his face was full of smiles, so he increasingly cherished the mirror. When there's no one, you're looking at each other. After more than a month, the urge to read furiously wandered away, often forgetting to go home. Back at home, the mirror's image of the immortal looks sad as if she's going to cry, and it's back to back, as it started after a day. That's why I realized it was because I had wasted my education. So I went to work behind closed doors, day and night. More than a month later, the phoenix's shadow is facing outward again. From then on, Liu Zhishui tested his education with the mirror. When he abandoned his schooling, the mirror's face was sad. After a few hard days of study, the mirror's face smiled. So he hung the mirror in front of him day and night, as if facing the teacher. After studying hard for 2 years, Liu Zhishui won the test and said with delight, "Now you can afford my immortals, take the mirror." And the brows are curly and long, the snow-white teeth are slightly exposed, and the smiles are radiant, as if standing in front of you. Liu Zhishui was so in love, she stared at her eyes for a long time. Suddenly the mirror's phoenix laughs and says, "The love in the shadow, the love in the picture," referring to today's situation. Liu Zhishui looked out in surprise, and it turned out that Fengshen was already standing by him. He held Fengshen's hand and asked about his father-in-law and mother-in-law. "I haven't come home since I left you and hid in a nearby cave to share your hardship," Fengshen said. Liu Zhishui went to the banquet in Fuchang, and Fengshen asked to go with him. They went to the banquet in the same car, and no one could see her from the other side. On her way home from the party, Pengsen privately consults with Liu Zhishui, pretending to be his wife in the county. After Fengshen returned, she began to meet with the guests and manage the housework. People were surprised at her beauty, not knowing she was a fox. Liu Zhishui, a student of the Fuchuan County Decree, once went to see his teacher and met Ding Sheng. "My parents-in-law have recently moved to other places. My wife is coming home to visit relatives and is coming back," said Ding, who enthusiastically invited Liu Zhishui to his home and gave a thoughtful reception. "I must send them a letter to tell them about your high school and to visit with them." Liu Zhishui suspected Ding Sheng was also a fox, and only after he carefully inquired about his family background did he learn that he was the son of a businessman from Fuchuan County. At one point, Mr. Ding came home from his villa in the evening and met a daffodil on his own. Ding saw that she was born so beautifully. He peered at her secretly, and the daffodils asked to follow him on the road. Ding was so happy that he took her back to his study and moved in with her. The daffodils can enter and exit through the cracks of the window before Ding Sheng knows she is a fox. "Lang Jun doesn't have to doubt me. I'm willing to marry you because you're honest," Shuixian told him. Mr. Ding adored her and stopped marrying her. After Liu Zhishui returned home, he borrowed the deserted mansion of the powerful family next door and prepared to stay for the congratulatory guests. The house was so tidy that it had no mantel to spare. When I went to check again overnight, the furnishings were completely refurbished. A few days later, more than 30 people showed up with drinks and other gifts, and cars filled the streets. Liu Zhishui led his father-in-law and Ding and Hu into the guest house, and Fengshen greeted his mother and 2 older sisters inside. Baxian said, "You're rich now. Don't you blame me as a matchmaker. Are my kushiro and embroidered shoes still there?" "The embroidered shoes are still the same ones, but they have already been seen by millions of people," said Fengshen, who found them and gave them to Baxian. 8 fairies patted Fengshen on the back with their embroidery shoes and said, "Hit you and send it to Liu Lang." So they threw the shoes into the fire, saying, "When new, flowers blossom. When old, flowers are graces." When rare, Dai borrowed them. Daffodil went on to wish that there was a long history, and it was famous for thousands of people. "But if you let your sister see you, you should be too poor." The phoenix lights up the fire and says, "The night is young, the day is full of joy, and the day is bright, and the world is watching." So he pinched the ash into a plate and piled it up into dozens of portions. He saw Liu Zhishui coming and gave it to him. I saw that the plates were full of embroidered shoes, and they were all the same as the original ones. The 8 immortals rushed out, shoving plates to the ground, where there were 1 or 2 stitched shoes. and the stitches disappeared when the 8 immortals lay on the ground and blew them. The next day, Mr. Ding and the couple went back because of the distance. 8 immortals and a sister play, father and who repeatedly urged her, only to come out of the interior at noon, with everyone back. When they came, the honor guards were so grand, the crowds were like crowds in a hurry. 2 robbers saw such beautiful women and their souls flew away, plotting to hijack them on their way. They were spotted leaving the village, following them at the back, less than a stone's throw away. The carriage was running fast, and the bandits couldn't keep up. At one point, the road was crossed and the horse was slow to move. A robber caught up with them, yelled at them with a knife, and people were scared off. When the robber got off the horse and lifted the curtain, it turned out that an old woman was sitting in it. She was suspected of looting the woman's mother, flying in to look both ways, slashing her right arm and being strapped up instantly. The robbers looked closely at the cliff, which was not a cliff, but a gate to the town of Pingle. The old woman in the car is Li Jinxiok's mother. Returning from the country, another robber then arrived and was captured with a slashed horse leg. The soldiers of the gate of the city bound them to the gate of the Taishuya, and once they were interrogated, the robbers confessed. There were thieves who failed to catch them, and the 2 were the first to be questioned. The following year, Liaozhai Studio won the Jinshi examination. Phoenix, fearing trouble, all turned away the congratulations of her relatives and friends. Liaozhai Studio never married another woman. It was only when he was promoted to the post that he took the concubine and gave birth to 2 sons.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.